Hi there. The Church of Nowhere on positive nationalism. I think churches have always been pretty keen on the concept of the nation state. And some people have linked this to the fact that the churches have supported the ruling classes, generally speaking. And the ruling classes rule the nation state. And therefore, it's obvious that the church, established church, would support the ruling classes and the nation state to which the ruling classes refer. But I'd like to introduce the idea of positive nationalism because, and I mention this in the context of Britain and the EU fiasco, which is what it is. And the Remainers, the Remainer camp, I think one of the reasons why they're Remainers is because they're very, very frightened of the growth of nationalism in Britain, and people fear the old style National Front that marched through East London in the 1970s, intimidating people of different races as they did so. And the National Front were scorned and hated and looked upon almost as insane people, really. And a lot of people who are Remainers fear the return of literally neo-fascism, and they believe that nationalism of any kind is in fact a cloak hiding national socialist or fascist tendencies. But I mean, I think that is completely paranoid, I have to say. I know that nationalism exists in fascism as a concept, obviously. But as someone reminded me the other day, when you look at National Socialism in Germany, I mean, Hitler's objective initially, apart from his obvious anti-Semitism, his objective was to unite the German Volk, the German people. So he was not so much a nationalist as a sort of Volkist, as one might say, a German Volkist. And his idea was to unite all the Germans that were living in Poland, Czech Republic, Bulgaria. The Germans were sort of scattered a little bit over Eastern Europe, and Alsace-Lorraine, of course. And he wanted to unite the German tribes, the German folk. So it was more than just nationalism, it was a sort of super nationalism, as it were. Whereas Franco was just a traditional nationalist. Or Pinochet, for example, in Chile, he was more of a Chilean nationalist. You see, Franco, or I suppose you could argue Franco wanted to unite the Spanish, and he wanted to force the Basque country and Catalonia to become Spanish, and not to faff around with dreams of being an autonomous region. Stop that. You're Spanish and get on with it. So I suppose he wanted to unite the kind of Spanish Volk as well, really. But it's a little bit different from National Socialism and Hitler's dream. And you could argue that, in fact, he wasn't particularly nationalist. As I say, the emphasis was on Germanism, on the German people, the German race. And which would extend, of course, into Austria as well. And I mentioned Austria because, to my mind, as a symbol of positive nationalism, I want to take the Rodgers and Hammerstein famous song from the very famous musical, The Sound of Music, in which there's a song called Edelweiss. And Edelweiss was obviously nothing to do with Austria because it wasn't even composed by an Austrian. But it's a lovely song, a lovely gentle folk song, and it has the lines, bless my bless my homeland forever. And this sounds a little bit Nazi because it's homeland and bless my homeland. It sounds quite nationalistic. But the whole song itself is about the little flower, the Edelweiss, that grows in Austria, as a symbol of one's commitment and one's love for one's country. Now, actually, if you compare this unofficial Austrian national anthem with the actual official one, the official one sounds like a typical 120 BPM march, a military marching band song, which has actually got no musical value whatsoever, really, and just goes pom 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 pom, and no one's ever kind of heard of it, and no one really cares about it, especially in modern Austria today. But if you think of the Edelweiss song, this gentle folk song, it seems to me that that sort of encompasses positive nationalism. And whereby, what I mean by positive nationalism is that you can be committed to your country, and committed to the freedom of your country and to the norms, values, and beliefs of your country, if you've got really something to be proud of about your country. In other words, the norms, values, and beliefs of your country, they are pretty much aligned to what is internationally agreed upon as being positive and good. So for example, you're an inclusivist society, and you're a multiracial, multinational, multicultural country, and you celebrate diversity and individuality and democracy, and so therefore that would probably make you someone who's proud of their country, committed to their country, because their country, is different from other countries, all right. But it's aligned to United Nations views on human rights, for example, on inclusivity, on the other. And if your country is sort of aligned to what is internationally accepted as the good, then you can be proud of your country for having, over the years, established the good in perhaps the face of evil within your own country. For example, in Ireland, you could be proud of the education system now, which has sort of fought a good fight against the kind of horrible abuses that were represented by the old, Christian Brothers teaching system, which has been superseded now by a more enlightened view of education. If that is your view, of course, and which it is the view of the majority of people living in Ireland. So, for example, you could feel rather proud that Ireland has modernised, and you could feel proud of the fact that Ireland is a liberal country, but also has a lot of good traditions about it from Catholicism and from religion generally, and has its own Celtic identity, and has sort of traditional views and traditional family values mixed in with liberal tolerance, and it's all to play for, and that I would say is positive nationalism. It also has a proper legal system, with trial by peers and the jury system and all that, which is why Ireland should guard against becoming Europeanized to the extent that its legal system is taken over by the French legal system, the Napoleonic system, or the German legal system, which, in my opinion, is not as fair or just as the current legal system in the Republic of Ireland is, which is, of course, modelled on the British legal system, which, of course, I know is flawed. I mean, every country is flawed. Every country has contradictions inherent in it. Every country has its problems, its lack of communication, has its ruling class who are hanging on to power and hanging on to their money, and the redistribution of wealth is not as good in Ireland as it could be, nor is it very good in Britain either. Um, but you can be socialist, you can be liberal, you can be progressive, and you can still be proud of your country. You can still want progressive, liberal, broadly socialist norms, values, and beliefs becoming mainstream in your country, and that would make you pretty proud to be a member of that community, for example. And I also have to say that I think that basically, generally speaking, the nation state is the most coherent uh, community unit in the world today. It sometimes brings in many different traditional ethnic groups of people. Sometimes it wishes to represent only one ethnic group of persons, like it in the former Yugoslavia, for example, and Serbia and Croatia. But the thing about it is that once a nation state has been established, and it's asserted its independence from a previous empire or previous economic ideological bloc, such as Yugoslavia. We wished it had been done peaceably, of course, and not through war. But once the nation state has been established, people are quite happy, and then when they feel secure and happy, they're more likely to start to align themselves to a more internationalist point of view. Whereas if you force people to adopt an internationalist ideology and force people to form a Soviet-style bloc of countries, or even an EU-style bloc of countries, then people are divested of their sense of community and ethnic awareness or ethnic tradition, and you get tensions when you force people to like each other that perhaps don't have much in common with each other. And it's a sort of contradiction that in order to make people more inclusivist, you have to respect their national sort of identity and their nationalistic aspirations, which, as I said, are more positive basically than just being fascist or Nazi. And indeed, after 1944 or 43, of course, the National Socialist Party became much more internationalist as it saw itself as the sort of fight against Bolshevik incursion. So in fact, Nazism became a sort of, rather late in the day, a kind of crusade against communism, an internationalist in that sense. And of course, they were building a German empire where everybody would have to kowtow to the Germans. So that's, again, more sort of internationalism and Europeanism rather than the respecting, natural national boundaries, as it were. So I am a positive nationalist in that sense. And I think if your country's got something to be proud of, like its human rights record and its record on liberalism and free expression, free association, then you can feel proud. And indeed, when Britain was more socialist than it is now, I mean, people were sort of saying buy British goods and services. It's good to buy British. We have a British socialism here. We have a British NHS, which is the envy of the world. And envy in a positive way because you wanted people to copy the NHS, of course. You wanted to spread British-style socialism and community care across boundaries. It wasn't that you just wanted Britain to have an NHS. You hoped that the USA would have an NHS and National Health Service and welfare service and all this. So, it wasn't that you were kind of proud of your country in a kind of superior way. You wanted people to emulate the communities that you were building up within your country. And I think that's what Brexit will result in, is that Britain will reassert its Britishness, but in a positive way, and indeed align itself with Europe anyway in terms of human rights and everything, and indeed exceed the standards of the European Union, especially in regard to environmentalism. There's no reason why Britain, free of the EU, cannot become more concerned with the environment than the EU, which, as we all know, of course, is virtually the lapdog of all the corporations and the globalist companies, which really don't have much of a vested interest in protecting the environment, but actually, as we know, just engage in tokenism in the majority of cases in order to make it seem like they're very concerned about environmentalism when in fact they're not. I think the Church of Nowhere could support positive nationalism, and I think you can have socialism and fairness, or even anarcho-communist communities, but still within the nation state, because I think the nation state really is the only viable and cohesive state of community, because it's large enough to encompass people who have commitment. You see, if a community is too small, then there's a problem of commitment. People don't commit to the project. They don't commit to maintaining and expanding and strengthening the community. They think it's a great idea until they have to do lots of work, and then they kind of go away and go and join another community which demands less of them. Whereas a nation state is just sort of big enough, really, to get enough people to commit to improving and maintaining the community. You see, whereas I think anarcho-communist communes, they wouldn't be big enough, and they run out of personnel. They'd run out of people who are prepared to sacrifice themselves in order to improve things for other people. That's just my. So I think that perhaps within a nation state you could have anarcho-communist communes, popping up everywhere, and cooperative workers union run companies, but you'd still have to have some kind of central government in place in some form or other, if just to maintain law and order and also security of the borders, because otherwise you're going to get white slavers and drugs traffickers and gangsters running the borders, which would be a horrific thing to end up with, really. And a lot of countries do have gangsters actually running their borders, and that leads to terrible abuse and terrible literal smuggling of children and things like that into slavery, which is appalling. So anyway, so I think that the Church of Nowhere could support the idea of the nation state, and therefore support a nation's aspirations to be free, and free of a monolithic um, arrangement of nation states as represented by the European Union.